Hey guys, welcome back. I want to introduce you to Amber Bray. Amber is an assisted living expert. She's got a couple residences right now that she's been running for the last couple years. You're going to learn a lot from today's lesson. And without further ado, let's just move right into the episode.
Thank you. Let me know if you can't hear me. This is really for you guys, so I want to tailor this where you want to go. I have some slides prepped, but I really want this to kind of answer your questions. And get you the information you want. I prepared this for people who don't know anything about this field so that we can kind of start at the basis. And I know some of our meetup people or some of the people who are already in it, maybe this won't be as beneficial, but we can. There's some other people in the room to learn from as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit to group homes as well as assisted livings, because sometimes when people think assisted living, that's only one category. And group homes, there's a variety of different types of group homes that are good investment opportunities. So, and now this isn't working. It was working. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Oh, no internet. Great, that's not going to help. So, there's a very good market opportunity. When we're talking about the silver tsunami, what many of you have heard in terms of the wave is, of course, all of us know that there are baby boomers, they're aging, and they're going to need assisted living. So every single day in the U.S., 10,000 people turn 65. 7% of those individuals will need some form of assistance. Every day, 4,000 people turn 85, and 22% of those people will need some form of assistance. And when we talk about assistance, it is important to know that that means help with your regular daily living. So that may be taking meds. So you need people who can administer meds. That's part of what they're doing. And there's qualifications for that. They need help bathing, dressing, and then, they also, you buy the groceries, you do the laundry, you do those kinds of things as well. But that's something that you could provide in home care as well. So just to kind of expound on that in terms of, there's a 35% leap, and then that goes to 30%. So by the year 2030, this trend just continues to grow and grow and grow. So people are starting to kind of say there's a wave coming and they want to get in on the wave a little earlier. And so we're having these kinds of conversations more and more. And that just another upswing to kind of see how that plays out. And this one kind of takes a little bit of a different look in terms of the different populations in the U.S. And this one shows the difference in independent living versus assisted living versus skilled nursing. And it's important to clarify that. So independent living is people who are living on their own. Sometimes they need help within the residence, or they want to live in a community environment. So people can go and provide in-home care, and that's generally not the medication certification. That's just people helping with, your laundry and cooking and cleaning and things like that. There's, or it just might be a retirement community, and you want activities, and you just want to not feel like you're the only person that's in that age group. So that can look really differently. Assisted living is that next step where they actually need some medical help, medication, distributing meds, but that is not all the way to skilled nursing. So you don't actually have to have a nurse on staff in an assisted living residence. Once you go into a skilled nursing, now you have RNs. And some people kind of marry all those or blend them all together. And so it's important to notice the difference. And those trends continue to show that where people are going to be and the continued need for assisted living, because people don't want to necessarily be in an institution and having nursing care and paying those kind of fees. Assisted living kind of allows for a bridge where they're no longer able to live on their own, but they're not living on their own. They have that assistance. So there's also looking at the monthly cost of care, the U.S. averages versus Denver averages. We do tend to be a little higher on the averages, but it's also because we can command that. There's the cost of living as well as people's desire to live here because of the climate and the sunny days and everything else, so we can command a little higher cost of care. I have that broken down by the different areas so that you can see the homemaker services versus home health aid and all those different places that I talked about, and being able to recognize that there's adult day health care where you basically, like your kids, you drop them off for the day so they can live with mom, they can live with their kids and yet receive care during the day, or that they just want some additional activities. And then there's also private pay. When you talk to people in assisted living, they're always talking about private pays and what they can command for private pays. And then what you're able to command per bed, I know when you're talking about most real estate, you're talking per door. For an assisted living residence, you're talking per bed. So when you're talking about a home, are you talking about a private room that has one person in the room or maybe a couple in a room? Or are you talking about a shared room where maybe there's 2 beds? Are you talking about a Medicaid bed, which it's basically the government's paying for that bed? There's different things that people talk about in the assisted living regarding that. So we don't talk about doors, we talk about beds, because you can get qualified for 8 beds, 12 beds, 16 beds, and each of those have different levels of expectations and requirements in terms of care providers and that type of thing. The other part of this, and this is what got me into assisted living initially, is I went to an investment meeting. It had nothing to do with real estate, and they were talking about the pension funds in Europe and what they invest in. And essentially they invest in 4 areas. They invest in senior housing, college housing, storage, and green, sustainable type of investments. And they determined that those areas had the most longevity, the most return, were also safe and conservative. And so I figured, well, if that's good enough for a European investment pension company, which tends to be ultra-conservative about what they're putting the money into, maybe that's good enough for me, and maybe that's where I should look. And so I started doing some research, and lo and behold, here I am. And so you can see that against the bond market, a normal RIT, or the S&P 500, senior housing overwhelmingly performs better than any of those other investment classes, and why a lot of people are really interested in this particular market. So as Adam was alluding to, there are different ways to get involved in this space. The first is to be an owner, the second is to be an operator, and the third, and I didn't talk about lending to any of these groups, I just spoke to the actual people who are doing it, and the third is to be an owner-operator, and so you have both sides of it. So as an owner, you own the property, and you essentially have a lease agreement, a triple net lease, with an operator for the use of the property for that purpose. And you can command higher rents than market rents. You also can enjoy the appreciation and depreciation. And generally, the tenants are pretty easy on the house. They're seniors. They're not having razzing parties. They're not, it's a pretty calm group of people who are pretty good to your house. When you are looking at these, you want to, your property would be valued based on comps. So you're looking at what is the value of this house and what could I sell it for? What are the market rents in the area? Could I, do I have another strategy if I needed to just put this out on the rental market? Could I break even with this, or at least still cash flow, maybe not as attractively? And then the group, the home conversions do not add sale value. So putting in the ramps, the fire suppression systems, all of those things don't generally actually increase the value of the home. So the only value that has is to the operator, or if you get a tenant in the future who needs ramps and grab bars and those kinds of things. So that's kind of determining if you want to just own the real estate. Yes.
Do generally the owners pay for those conversions?
You can just determine that with the operator and their willingness to put in those capital improvements. Some do, some don't. That's a negotiation. Some, because it's your home, feel like you need to make those capital improvements. Some because that's going to be their business and it's dependent upon it. What's important to recognize is this turns your real estate sort of into a commercial real estate property. And just like with Target, or I'm sure they own their own buildings, but like a strip mall, you're owning the property, they're putting up their own signage, they're changing out the shelving, all of that. And so you could say, just like a strip mall, you wouldn't go in and pay for the shelving, and in this case, you're not going to pay for the grab bars either. So, but that is really a negotiation between you and them in determining how that's going to work. Any other questions on that side before okay. On the operator side, you own the business. You essentially own the assisted living, and the licensing and everything else is in your name. And it's a service business. Your net operating income is generally 20 to 30% if run well and you have enough beds and you're running a well-run operation. You also have the benefit of knowing that you're making a significant contribution to the community, that people need a place to live and that you're providing good care. I always felt like it was important to feel like I wouldn't mind having my mom there, that I felt like it was well-run and somewhere that I'd want my mom to be able to live, and that it wasn't, something that felt institutional and uncomfortable. There are options to hire consultants to start. We've had a few come and talk at the meetup that will get you off the ground and get you up and running and handle some of those things. And there are contract management companies that will help run it. So if you want to be an owner-operator, but essentially kind of pass off the daily piece of that, there are companies that essentially will do that as well. And then there's the owner-operator who essentially does both. You own the property, you purchase the property, you don't want to have to lose that income to somebody else, or keep your overhead as low as possible. And you also want to run it. And then maybe you hire administrators and an office manager and the care staff, so that you're not doing the day-to-day work, but you still own the operation as well. And the cap rates on that are 7 to 12% depending on the number of beds. Questions on the 3 different options? How many of you at this point want to be option number 1? Okay, how many of you at this point want to be option number 2? Okay, that tends to be what I see in many of these rooms, and the disadvantage of that is that there's not a lot of people who want to do the other stuff. Maybe I need to go to RN meetings or medical communities or something, and then maybe all the hands would be up on the other side. But that is the biggest challenge right now. All of you want to invest, and the people who actually want to run it, there are far fewer of them. Yes.
Actually, I'll put my hand up for number 2. I missed that. I was waiting to number 3.
Oh, number 3. Okay, number 3. I'm sorry. Number 3. Okay, so I see a few hands for number 3. Okay. Yes. It's possible, absolutely. Right now, I think they're still wanting to grow and acquire more and do that. And so I think they're willing to work with people. But I think if we create competition, the fortunate part for me is in the ALR space, at least when I got into this space, it felt very collaborative. When I was in the fix and flip space, it felt like shark-infested waters. But when I was in the ALR space, it felt like it was a very collaborative space. Everybody was willing to educate. We were, we didn't feel like, oh, you're going to open one, that means you're going to take away something from me. It was much more just, how can I help? Let me give you some advice. Come see my operation, tour. It was just much more collaborative. And so I think what I would like to see is that we retain that, and that it doesn't become something where we're all like jumping in and trying to make our money in it. And I think the operators, this is a heartfelt business. They are doing it because they want to provide a service and they want to take care of people who need to be taken care of. And I want to see that retained, that it remains somewhere that we can feel proud of the service that people are providing and getting, and that we retain a good branding as well. When people hear of residential home assisted living, that has a positive connotation. And my fear is that if a bunch of people just want to make money, we lose that. And the government regulators are afraid of that too. And part of the reason that they're starting to instill more regulations in this space is because there are so many more investors flooding to it and going, I can make money, there's money to be made here. And they're basically trying to shut that door to some extent too and make it harder and the barrier to entry harder so that only serious people are kind of getting into the space. Now they've gone overboard in a couple areas, but you know, their heart's in the right place in terms of why they're doing it.
I have a question. Sorry, a question about that. Some of the regulations, and maybe you're going to get to them. But I heard like some free sinks and lots of parking spaces, things like that. I don't know if that was a rumor or not, but
She's the best one to answer that. So
there you go.
We had there was a large opposition to the regulations, which were just recently changed, and we were able to effect some changes in that so that it's much more reasonable for small operators. They've made, for example, parking requirements. Now, instead of the Department of Health getting involved, which why would they get involved in parking requirements? They defer to the local zoning authorities. And with respect to elevators and kitchen operations, it's a little bit less for smaller businesses. Yeah, so it's more approachable. Also, we've been working with the standard body that writes those standards because they kind of overlooked this asset class. So we're working with them to try to get the national standards revised.
any other questions on that piece of it? Yes.
Zoning, are you having a lot of issues with zoning in residential neighborhoods versus commercial and multifamily conversions?
It depends. There are areas that are much more favorable to it. I've heard really good things about Littleton and that they're much more open and want this type of, and I've heard horrible things about like Erie, that they pretty much tried to bar all of this from there. So, and you can speak to Boulder.
What was the question? I didn't hear it.
Zoning. Each different zoning area, each city has its own zoning requirements and how easy or difficult they make it.
So the Federal Fair Housing Act protects group homes. Seniors aren't specifically covered by the Federal Fair Housing Act, but it covers people with disabilities. So anybody that lives in assisted living is going to be considered disabled. So under the Federal Fair Housing Act, either HOAs or local governments, they can't discriminate against group homes to try to keep them out. So even if residents or neighbors get upset about it, it's like, hey, this is a federal law. Now, that having been said, not all, there are some places that are clearly in violation. Lafayette doesn't allow any group homes in residential areas. Clearly a federal law violation. Would love to sue them, but it's time and it's money, and it's easier just to find the path of least resistance, like Amber was saying. You go and you find the place where, it's going to be easy.
So how do you find, because that's, as I'm hearing, like, so they would want to buy some place with the intent of making it into assisted living, then finding out it's a city or village that isn't welcoming of that. So is there some place, how do you find it out before you buy a property?
Well, for sure you want to do the research before you buy.
And that's at your zoning department.
Okay.
You can call your zoning department.
And
What we have run into is a limit in some of the group homes of 8 people. I think Douglas County's got that right now. So it's a little bit challenging to get enough people to make it worthwhile. 8 homes or eight people that's a tough deal. 10 is kind of a nice starting point.
I would recommend going right to the zoning department. I'd recommend researching the zoning code and then working with somebody that understands, because I've had clients that went right to the zoning department, like in Erie, and the answer came back, no, you can only have 8. But then we just helped somebody in Douglas County, where Douglas County said, no, you can only have 8. And we wrote a letter, and they said, oh, okay, well, 16, that's fine.
And it often depends on the property. So you have to go through, there's stages, right? They can't deny you, and in many areas, they can't deny you 8. They have to allow that because of fair housing. But to go to 12 requires reasonable accommodation. You have to write a letter. And then they can look at your property and determine if they think that's going to cause undue stress and traffic and blah, blah, blah. Going to 16 is also possible, but then there's even more things that they're looking at, and how big is your plot, and how all of those kind of things. So each area is very different. I wouldn't say that that's your first step, though. I would say the securing kind of what that looks like in terms of operators and where you want to be, and is that does that even have the market demand in terms of the need? There are places that are saturated. There are places that, because of the big boxes, and what I mean by big box is, you know, the 64 beds versus the homes, and knowing like how much demand is there in the various areas, so that you're not coming into a place that already has 40 of them because it was easy. And there's other work to necessarily be done before going to zoning, but if there's many of them, probably it's because they're fairly easy to get through that process too. Other questions regarding requirements, zoning, regulations? Yeah. So I wanted to give you a sense of what it looks like on the operation side, because yes, the real estate side is attractive. You own the property, you lease it to someone, you're kind of don't have to worry about the operation as long as they pay their lease every month. You're done. However, where the cash flow is more attractive, generally, if you're running an operation, it's on the operations side. And so the question is, do you want to be an operator? And so if we make the math really simple, we have 10 beds, $4,000 per month for a private room, that's $40,000 gross. Then if you look at your expenses, you have the need for generally an administrator. If that's not you, you may want to hire an administrator. You may want to hire a house manager. An administrator can manage up to 3 houses? 5 houses?
It varies. There's not a limit on it really.
Okay, I didn't remember if they could put that limit in. So they can manage multiple houses, whereas an office manager might be buying groceries for one house and managing the staffing in that one house. So maybe you want an administrator and an office and or a house manager, and then your caregivers. The people are there 24/7 and they're administering meds and cleaning and cooking and doing all that. You have your lease and you have your meals. And then your net income can be 15 to 22K if that is the case in terms of how well you're running that and how you pay people and all of those. Any questions on what that piece of it looks like?
Is that based on a certain acquisition price? That particular slide?
This is based more on some general numbers that are run across that we typically see. That would be a fairly typical situation.
We put a startup cost of about $900 per house on that slide there, which is kind of an average for a 10-bed. Figuring $600K for a nice house, you're going to put maybe $150K into it just to renovate it. And then you need about $150K of operating capital to get started, just to make sure you get through the ramp-up period. Yes. Yeah.
And based on true numbers of things that we've seen out there. So what would you be looking for in terms of a property? You want a large ranch. 300 square feet is ideal. You want lots of bedrooms, ideally on the main level. If they're not on the main level, it's okay if it's like a walkout basement if you're caring for seniors. Otherwise, you're making it more difficult to care for seniors because you have to have elevators or you have to have a chairlift to get downstairs. Downstairs is fine if you're going to be serving populations like people with brain injuries, mental health or mental illness, which gets into more sober living. There's also classifications for people with developmental disabilities. Those are all group homes as well that people tend to overlook and forget about. And even the regulators tend to steer it more toward the seniors versus those other classifications because they're able to get up and downstairs and they need care for longer. You're not serving somebody who's 93, you're serving somebody who's 30 and they're going to be in your home for 15 years. So there are some nice benefits to serving a younger population in a totally different classification. But because of the graphs I showed you earlier, everybody tends to think, oh, assisted living, that's seniors, which it's not. So the other thing that you would need to look at are the common areas. Where can they gather, watch TV? Is there a private room where they can have family come and visit with just them that's outside of their bedroom? There might be possible living quarters for a caregiver. That can be in the basement, that can be in a loft, that can be over the garage. but it is nice to have a place for them to be able to rest, to get away, especially if you have an office manager or a house manager, that they can actually live on the premises and keep an eye on things. The conversions that you're going to be looking at are ADA modifications. If you're serving a senior population, you're going to be looking at ramps, showers, grab bars, ways for them to, do they need transfers? You're going to be taking out baths they don't need, a nice drop-in tub. So if you just did a fix and flip, I saw someone who did a fix and flip and they're like, come see if this would be a good ADA. Like, you're going to have to get rid of that nice, beautiful tub you just put in, the nice jetted tub. Don't need that. It does require, once you move into that group home status, it is going to require a fire suppression system and an alarm system. That's generally off the bat, 30, 40 grand right there. Possibility of an elevator, that's another 30, 40. And then you want to know your zoning and licensing requirements. The labor, I already talked to, having an administrator, the caregivers, and the possibility of having either a house manager or a management company, depending on which way you want to go there. And then this is all based on heads and beds. Really, it's all about, when you talk about occupancy for it, that's your occupancy. When you have an empty bed, that's a cost, right? And it's easier to weather that when you have a larger facility than when you have 8 beds and you have an unexpected death and now you have a vacancy. And so making sure that you're keeping a waiting list and a lot of people coming in. You can have referral companies, they're placement agencies, if that's what they do, is place people with you. They're doing a really good job of marketing yourself, building a brand name, going out, shaking hands, getting people to know you, especially within the medical community, relationships with discharge personnel, and then you still need to do your proper housekeeping as well. So how to get started? I highly recommend buying an existing operation if you are brand new. They already have the financials, they have the track record, they've gone through the zoning, they've done all that. So you're essentially able to value it based on, here are the numbers, here are their financials, here's how well it's running. You can buy distressed. I know someone who buys distressed and turns them around. Or you might want to buy something that's actually functioning really well. If you want passive income, you're going to do far better if it's already cash flowing and you're just picking it up. You will pay a premium for that because they're essentially selling you an up and operating business and property and real estate all as a package deal. The conversions are complete. Licensing may be transferable for a little lower cost. You still have to buy it, but it might be less. The residents and staff are in place, and the business operating policies, everything's running. It also is a great way to start if you want to learn it and then apply that to a second place. So someone that's in our community, they bought one, they then purchased, and then they built their second one with that knowledge. They were able to kind of look at what's working here, and then they could take that into their second one. When you already have one, it's easier to also weather the holding time. It's easier to say, well, I am allowed 2 people before I'm licensed. I can take those 2 people and move them over here and then backfill this. It just gives you some maneuverability. I can tell you that starting from zero and learning it is hard. And I wouldn't suggest that for most people. There's a large learning curve. There's the holding time, the conversion cost, learning all the rezoning, learning all the requirements, and trying to figure all of that out when you and or your operators are new is just difficult. But once you have a couple under your belt, then it becomes a lot easier to do that and build the operation from scratch. Yes?
I have a recommendation if you do that, and it depends on the area of the country you're in and how your residents come to you. But I talked with an owner in Phoenix. He bought one, was running great, and then as soon as he owned it, the brokers that would place people stopped placing people there because they didn't have a relationship with him as the new owner. And so he went from 12 people within about 8 months to about 2 people and then started growing back up. So if you do buy pre-existing, you may want to make a continual relationship, at least a transitionary year with the current ownership.
Good suggestion. That's great. Any questions about the property, getting started, whether you want to buy versus build, any of that? Financing options are available as well there's different ways to finance each of these. When you are getting something that's existing, it's now an up and running business. So you can get business financing and through SBA or HUD. The nice part on financing a new operation is you are essentially just buying real estate at that point. You're buying a house and you can get a conventional loan at the going rate right now, which is fairly attractive, and buy that house and then do all of that. So I know a lot of fix and flippers tend to be roll up your sleeve, get the job done, and that may seem like a really attractive way to go. If you go that route, make sure you have a very experienced operator so that you might be doing the real estate part, but they know all those zonings and the requirements and the licensing and that piece. So one way or another, experience is good, whether you buy it or you hire it. Questions on any of that? Economies of scale is another thing that is really helpful to have in this. And this should be the goal. If you are going to get into this, it's an endeavor. It's not just do one and then move on to something else. Generally, you want to grow it to be sellable from an exit perspective and also to provide the economies of scale. So if you have 3+ homes within a 20-minute commute distance, it allows you to get better financing. You can actually group them together and buy 3. And the financing for that is actually easier sometimes than just starting with 1. If you get them all together, you can actually lump them for licensing purposes as well, which saves you some money on that part. You can share operating costs across multiple locations. So you can share the marketing costs, the menu planning, buying in bulk. You can share the administrator. If you have a staff person that's out, you can have another staff person come in and fill in. And so you have more beds, so you can weather that, one vacancy. If somebody isn't a fit for one of your properties and they need higher level of service and you offer, say, memory care at one of your other facilities, you can refer them to your own facility. You're not saying, I'm sorry, I'm full up, can't help you. You're able to potentially help them somewhere else. And it's also higher profits allow you for additional services. You could get a transport vehicle and share that amongst. You can get a chef, you can get catering, you can do those things. You can have nicer activities and take all 40 people to the mountains for the weekend. Those things become more viable than when you're a small 8-bed. The other thing about being a small 8-bed is you kind of end up living and breathing you're there and you kind of end up running it and everything's in there. Whereas when you have 3, you're running it like a business. And so it actually allows you to kind of step away, take vacations, do some of that because you're going to have to put the policies, the practices, the staff in place to do that well. The exit strategy, typically the sale rate is a 10 cap, and you can see with the market valuation what that would look like in order to sell it with those profits. So I do have a couple different homes just to kind of show you what they look like. This one was built in May of 2017. It's bright and sunny, has an open floor plan, 4 bedrooms upstairs, and there we have a reasonable accommodation for 12. And we are finishing the downstairs so that we can expand downstairs as well. I wanted to show the sprinkler system, the finishing the space, rents, and what that return looks like on just that part of it. Yes?
So it looks like roughly 3 beds per bedroom. Is that how you're...
So we will have an additional 5 bedrooms downstairs. We currently have accommodation for 8. So there are 2 per bedroom, and and you want to have 100 to 150 square feet in order to accommodate 2 people. So if you have a smaller bedroom, it's not going to be able to do that. But in this case, what's that?
120 is in there
120
for 2.
for 2. Okay. And then I also have one in Aurora. It has 5 bedrooms. This one is currently licensed for 8. And there's a sleeping room for the caregiver. And we are able to convert the garage for additional space as well. Now, one thing to note about garages is while HOAs can't keep you from having a group home, they can keep you from converting your garage. So that is something to know as well, that if you're essentially saying we want to convert this, sometimes they don't want the outside of the house to change. So the ways people have gotten past that is they essentially keep the door and then they build behind that. So there are some things to look at in terms of the HOA for that too. Yes?
So, sorry, this is a stupid question, but if they're assisted living, they don't have their own cars. You don't have to worry about now I've got 6 cars in the street.
They do not, because they're assisted living. They need help with bathing. They're not going to be driving. So,
Usually. I had a gal call me today and say that her 89-year-old resident had taken off in his new car that he got back, didn't come back, and was in a panic.
Yikes.
So it can happen, but.
So generally they can't drive. The bigger question is how many visitors are they going to be having? And ideally, in an ideal world, each person would have a visitor every day. And so you would have that many, but that just never happens. So, other questions? Okay. So that's what I have for this group in terms of my presentation and prepared.